This week, FortiBleed and how to defend your network edge. Stay tuned. Below the surface, coming up next. Welcome to Below the Surface. This is episode number 77, being recorded on June 26th, 2026. I'm Paul Sidorian, joined by Mr. Chase Snyder. Chase, welcome.
Hey, Paul.
What's going on? Mr. Vlad Babkin is here with us. Vlad, welcome.
Hello.
Vlad is like a weird it's weird. Problems always arise once you start recording. This is just the rule of podcasting. Now it seems better. All right. Hopefully it keeps up for the remainder of the show. Before we get started, Below the Surface listeners can learn more about Eclipsium by visiting eclipsium.com/go. There you'll find the ultimate guide to supply chain security. An on-demand webinar I presented called Unraveling Digital Supply Chain Threats and Risk, a paper on the relationship between ransomware and the supply chain, and a customer case study with DigitalOcean. If you want to see our product in action, you can sign up for a demo. All that at eclipsium.com/go. This week, we probably have some other topics too. I think that we might flesh out once we talk about FortiBleed. But FortiBleed was the big one that happened recently. We put out a blog about it. We put out a lot about it. We've got detections in the works for some of the password hashes that we'll talk about. Decisions that Fortinet made to prevent administrators from being locked out that ended up causing some unintentional exposures, I'll call them. But I think to set the state, so I generated some AI show notes, not to publish and not to cheat, but just because the three of us we've learned a lot about FortiBleed, but I just wanted some talking points. And I got to say, the opening paragraph that was generated by Claude Sonnet 4.6 is pretty awesome. Like, you could read it almost like a movie trailer. FortiBleed, it's not a 0-day. It's not a single CVE. It's the name given to a long-running, multi-phase, industrial-scale credential harvesting and access brokering operation targeting internet-exposed Fortinet FortiGate firewalls and FortiOS SSL VPN gateways. FortiBleed, coming soon. Actually, already coming to a network near you.
Do you choose Sonnet 4.6 for writing specifically? Do you choose it because cheap tokens? Why are you on that? Why are you on that whole?
I think it's cheap. Yeah, cheap. I think in terms of like the price for tokens with the effectiveness of it for writing stuff, for doing some basic research, I find it to be pretty good. I probably need to go back and try some other models for that, but that seems to be the one that I like. I reserve Opus for, my coding and my projects and stuff like that. And I try not to use that to generate content. So
yeah, good ratios. I heard there's always something going around about which models are the best about it. Like, I feel like everybody benchmark and stuff, but I heard a fairly compelling argument that Gemini, like 3.5 maybe, is really at writing, which would be a huge get for like the Gemini models. I feel I'm off topic already. I can't talk yet. AI models, but the Google models are really great at, like, I feel like everything except for coding. Like, I would not bust out,
right,
not do Gemini for agentic coding, but images, video, writing. Apparently, I haven't actually been using it for that, but maybe I'll try. Those are also good things.
Yeah, and I think it's pertinent to this topic because when there's a lot to FortiBleed. There's a lot to the campaign. It says in the notes that due to an open directory, right? So this is how we learned about it, is that there was a security researcher, Volodymyr, aka Bob Diachenko, discovered that a threat actor had accidentally exposed an HTTP server that was running an open directory, and they grabbed 319 files. So now here's where AI helps us. Someone did the analysis of most of those files and what they contained, and there was multiple publications. So then, as security researchers like us working for a cybersecurity company, for defenders, you have to consume all of that and figure out what it means to you. I think that's a good use case for AI. I heavily used AI to help query what was being publicly published on this, which are the best sources. If I found a source, I kind of fed that in, like, hey, take a look at this. I don't know if we linked to the report, but there was a great report from some. Well, the Hudson Rock one is the one that gets a lot of the press, but there was another one that published an analysis of it, and I can't remember which one that was. And so like that was a PDF. I think it was a SOC Radar PDF, or one of those companies published it. So, consuming and making sense of something this large certainly requires, AI is, I think, really good at it. So those 319 files included credential database, custom scanning and sniffing tools, deployment scripts, the hash topolis job log. So that was the GPU cluster they were renting to crack the hashes, and victim data that was sorted by industry revenue and headcount, which most of us inferred that the threat actors were collecting this data in order to sell it. And what's interesting, like, there was, to my knowledge, there was no malware deployed to a Fortinet device. This was 100% like credential abuse, um, coupled with living off the land on a Fortinet device. And the malware and tooling ran on like Windows and Linux systems and in other places. They weren't necessarily using malware against the Fortinet devices, which, if you think about it from an attacker perspective, is great because it gives defenders less indicators to go on. For cybersecurity people like us that are trying to help, customers detect this stuff, it super sucks because they're living off the land, right? And so you can glean a lot from your logs. I can talk a little bit, about that later. Certainly, having good log telemetry, even though I'm not a huge fan of relying on logs for some of these indicators, can certainly help. But essentially, this campaign revolved around credentials and collecting credentials in ways that maybe a lot of us hadn't like put together in a single campaign. So it's interesting, as people ask us questions about this, they're like, well, if my Fortinet device isn't exposed to the internet, like, I'm fine, right? I'm like, no, you're not. Because they collected, I believe they were collecting Fortinet credentials from info stealers that were on like Windows systems. So like if you were an admin and you logged into a Fortinet device and you had an info stealer on it, that's one way they were able to grab your credentials. Then once they got into a Fortinet device via some credential, they also used credentials that were known to be like backdoor credentials on Fortinet devices that were from previous campaigns. So threat actors would use an exploit for a vulnerability on an internet exposed Fortinet device. They would implant that with a backdoor, and then those backdoor credentials were also used to attack the entire internet of Fortinet devices and getting into those. But then it leapfrogged. So the way they were building their credential database is they essentially turned every Fortinet device into a passive sniffer, listening for specific protocols using a built-in FortiOS command to sniff packets. So this means you really just kind of need one, so to speak, Fortinet device, and any traffic going through it, attackers were looking for credentials, not just for your Fortinet devices, but also other things as well. And they were just building large data sets of credentials based on this, which is, I mean, for the attackers, pretty smart, right? Like, that's,
Yep.
if Vlad, if you and I were to construct this attack, it might look pretty similar. Right? Like, that's,
Yeah.
we put our evil hats on, we're like, this kind of makes sense.
Yeah, they pretty much harvested a lot of credentials across the board. Get logged into devices, harvested credentials from there. Like, as far as I have read on write-ups, they also took into account old password field, which FortiOS for some reason said to keep, even if you rotated your hashes to be more modern, so that they could brute force stuff. So
So they would,
and then they run massive GPU cluster to try to brute force all of the hashes they got. This is like,
yeah, it's
literally
interesting.
just
So they were
scaled up
preying
credential
upon,
harvesting.
yeah, they were preying upon SHA-256 hash passwords, and which I don't know like where we stand as an industry as to how much of that was a problem before now. I think we kind of knew that
It
there
is a
were
problem.
there's I don't want to say weaknesses, but
It's called
computing.
weak hashing,
Yeah.
and it's all known, and it's like common weakness. So like if you use a SHA-256 for a password, it's a weak hash. This is what it is defined as in, I believe, Mitre. I don't remember the exact numbers, but I believe there's a specific weakness which identifies like this.
And so I think we almost got away with it until such time you just needed a credit card and 40 GPU cluster in order to crack SHA-256 hashes, which is exactly what the threat actors did. They were like, oh, look, there's these Fortinet devices. The passwords are hashed with a SHA-256 sum. Let me just go spin up 40 GPUs in a cluster and start cracking them. And we progressed to a point where threat actors could do that really easily. Whereas I think previously to build something and set that up was somewhat of a barrier. That barrier is much less now because really all you need now is a credit card, which is interesting.
4090s for 4090. If you look at the film Terminator and how much teraflops Skynet needed to run from there, well, 4090 has, I believe, 2 times that. So like modern GPUs are really, really powerful for not a lot of money.
Right.
So if you just those, you can just go and crack.
Yep.
Glad to see us returning to the foundational benchmarks of our industry. The amount of teraflops required for Skynet. Really,
I like how we're measuring things.
The comparison against which all other systems are judged.
Yeah.
We're like a trend we've been tracking is, and that Verizon has been tracking in their data breach investigation report, is the rise of vulnerability exploitation in general as an initial access vector, and specifically the presence of network devices in breaches. And it feels like this FortiBleed event could meaningfully influence both of those numbers. And it didn't happen. It happened recently enough that it's not reflected in the 2026 Verizon DBIR report. But I'm going to be so curious if they report numbers about this next year. And if they include these Fortinet devices as network edge devices that were present in a breach, I mean, it's a large number of devices. This is like a single event that
because if you
one big thing,
if you combine if you combine Fortinet devices that were vulnerable or are vulnerable, or have a credential that someone gathered through all the means we described previously, what we find is you get to so it says it right here. So they had credentials for approximately 73 to 86,000 internet facing Fortinet FortiGate firewalls, which was roughly 50% of all internet facing Fortinet devices, because of the way they structured the campaign so precisely to compromise these platforms. The password thing is interesting. I'm going to explain it one more time, and then I swear to God, I don't want to ever explain how Fortinet stores passwords like this ever again, because the question keeps coming up, because it's confusing, right? On the surface, you don't dig into the details. You're like, what is happening? So I don't have the specific versions, but up until a specific version of FortiOS, passwords are stored in a SHA-256 hash. Or what's the other one, Vlad?
There are 4 hashes.
So there's 4.
Let me explain this in detail.
Yeah,
so
this is
there
part
is
of
AK1
Vlad's
hash,
life now too.
which is based on SHA-1 wildly, and it's not very hard to compute it. I believe there's public modules in John the Ripper hashcat. So you can just find the implementation and like implement it in Python if you want to see a POC. There is SH2 hash, which is based on SHA-256, and again, it's almost the same as AK1. It's just replace one hash function with another. There is a third hash type, which is from the modern versions. I don't remember exact update when it was introduced, but it is based on actually secure PBKDF2 function.
Yep.
And there is another hash type, which was used by older FortiOS versions where the password was not stored hashed but encrypted. So you could actually decrypt it straight if you could get the key out of the firmware. And there is one other caveat. If you migrate from SHA-256 to PBKDF2, and I believe a key 1 to SHA-256 is like to SH2 one is probably the same, FortiOS stores a so-called old password property inside user accounts, which is not normally visible from getting the config. But if you make a config backup, you get that old password. So even if you rotated your hash to be like PBKDF2, but never like told FortiOS, yes, yeah, you never told like FortiOS to just nuke old password hash. No, it's not just logging. If you log in, you will get the updated hash, but the old password still stays.
Right, until the administrator logs in.
No, until you remove it forcefully. It's there to allow downgrading.
So the Fortinet docs say it wipes it out when you log in. Is that not true?
Maybe.
Yeah,
I believe I read a doc that it doesn't. But regardless, you needed to take an action to wipe.
Yes.
Like some
and
action.
It's interesting, they stored so when you upgraded from you can't just go change these hashes on your own as far as I know. But if you upgrade from a older version that was hashing them with a weak hashing algorithm, when you upgrade to a certain version or later, it replaces the hashing function with PBKDF2, stores the old hash, but you can't see your old hash if you just do like a show config or whatever the equivalent is in FortiOS.
You need backup.
You need the full configuration backup, which is, for those of us managing even IoT routers, you go into the management interface and you go do a full configuration backup. In that backup, that's where you'll see your old password hashes. And they did that in case, and here's where I think you'll find configuration backups, because as you know, if you've ever administered these devices, if you're upgrading from one version to the other, right? Let's say you're upgrading, I'll make it simple. You're going from version 1 to version 2. When you're on version 1, you should, the documentation almost always states this, do a full configuration backup, then upgrade to version 2, right? So that full configuration backup is there. If you have problems, let's say whatever those problems are, and you need to revert to version 1, in Fortinet's example, that old password hash gets restored so you can still log in. So if they just wiped out the hashes in the upgrade and you went, oh no, I need to go to the previous version, it would lock the administrator out. So that's why I'm told from the Fortinet docs that they preserve that old password hash. Kind of weird they preserve it only in the full configuration backup. And I guess it's one way to do it, right? Like, oh, when a new administrator logs in, we know everything's good. Although I'm curious, like if you upgrade, everyone logs in, all those old hashes go away, and then you revert, what happens? Are you all locked out? Potentially.
Yep. That's what I read. Like if you set a specific option, old hashes are wiped out, and thus administrators are locked out. But if you don't set this option, old password hash is stored, so if you revert, you can still log in using the old password. But like this is so not obvious and so hidden. Like design choice to pretty much hide that old hash still exists from the administrator in the use backup for config to actually check if it is there, and have a whole separate vertical to actually explain it is like, FortiOS, are you a security company or not? Because if you are not doing a good job at security. Let's put it this way.
It's interesting too.
You don't do this with hashes.
It's interesting too that threat actors figured this out, and they were recovering, even if you did upgrade to a new version, they were recovering your old password hashes and cracking them. Which that's how we learned about all this.
This is hash mismanagement at its finest, I would say.
Yeah.
Like if you update the hash, either propose the administrator straight out to go one way, or tell that it's still not secure and shows the old hash in the config, so that administrators can easily check and not have to dig through like tons and tons of your documentation. Like there is a secure by default thing. If you are not secure by default, it's gonna fail, and it's failing right now.
Yeah, and it's interesting, like the other way they got some of these hashes was there was a leak, CVE 2018-13379, was a FortiOS SSL VPN path traversal flaw that exposed plain text credentials. and I believe someone collected like 500,000 accounts from that. So they had access to that previous leak. Now, if you were vulnerable back in 2018 and like you upgraded but never wiped out your old hashes, that means an attacker could still get in and recover those old hashes, get other accounts, right? On that system. So it kind of, and there was another leak too. The Belton Group dropped 15,000 FortiGate configuration files, so they started cracking all those passwords. So they were building a giant password database for FortiGate firewalls based on multiple sources, including, like I said, InfoStealer logs, which is just amazing.
Yeah, and like in this case, it's like while we are singling out Fortinet, it's not like there's only ones having this exact mess with password storage.
Yeah,
like
agreed.
a lot of devices actually have this. Like
Yeah,
surprising amount of security appliances cannot even manage their own hashes. Like this for me is like a paradox of the modern day and age. You buy an appliance to make your network secure. At the same time, like it doesn't become more secure, it becomes less secure. So like at this point, like we should start calling this stuff like insecurity appliance. Like
yeah, the bar is not very, very high with a lot of these things. And I think this really, you're right, Vlad, this underscored the need to audit your password hashes, especially on these devices where you don't have great visibility in what can happen when we run into these situations where weak password hashes are in play.
Yeah, so to give a little bit of silver lining, at the very least, FortiOS is explicit at what kind of password storage they use. Many devices are not. Like they store the password somehow, and you never know, and you don't have any documentation about this. And in many cases, the password is reversible.
Yep.
So like, I don't know
And you don't know what
happens
hash it is, and I think that's an important point for our audience that Fortinet, when it stores its password hashes, includes a prefix that tells you which type of hash that it is. So in that sense, and that's not uncommon either, but that makes it much easier for people like us to create checks for it, at least.
I mean, this is security for obscurity. Let's not mess with like password hash management problems and like making hash identifiable. Like when you do a system for hashing the password, you have to assume the attacker already has all of your source code and knows exactly how the system works.
Yeah.
And it still has to stay secure in this case. And this is the main mistake FortiOS did. Like they didn't assess it this way. So they hope that like some level of obscurity will save them with like this old password has been hidden and nobody will figure it out. But hello there, they will. So you can make your hashes identifiable, just make it really hard to crack. Like for example, in our own product, when we build password management system, like we built it around the assumption that okay, everybody can know how exactly we store the hashes, and it still must be really complicated to actually get to them, right? So for example, we employ techniques like the hash of the password, not the password, the hash is stored encrypted. So that like if you compromise the Eclipsium database, you have to like first steal the encrypted hashes, then you have to steal the key from another location that's not the database.
Right.
And like, etc., etc. And we were very explicit about this. Like, all of the devices, especially security appliances, should start becoming auditable. Like, there must be a push from the industry to make them auditable, where you can actually check their internals and whatnot, because the situation we are in right now, where appliances don't let you into OS shell, at the same time attackers get RCEs on them and just can walk around there invisible, is ridiculous.
Well, and the other mitigating factors they put in place too is you can enable multi-factor authentication on many of these devices. You can also use a cloud account. What do we call that? Like a different authentication account, like in a lot of cases, like a Google authenticated account. In Fortinet's case, it's a FortiCloud account that you can use to authenticate to those devices. But keep in mind, there was a heinous vulnerability a while back with the FortiCloud. If it was configured with FortiCloud, it exposed a vulnerability that let attackers log in. So all of this is an attack surface, and there's no silver bullets here in security.
Call me super old-fashioned, but like I don't like all of the cloud authentication systems we have. Like I mean, remember Battlestar Galactica? Like really, really old movie, and it really highlighted a very valid point. If all of your systems are technically networked and all like operate with a singular login systems, that's a singular point of failure. Break
Right.
that, and your entire system just falls apart.
Yep.
On your security appliances, you don't want to attach them to a cloud system, which if it breaks basically every customer FortiOS has.
Mm-hmm.
Like, call me old-fashioned, but I want my device to handle login fully locally. I don't want it to go through the cloud to login me.
Right. And with SSH, I haven't tested this, but I'm fairly certain you can put an SSH key on most of these devices, Fortinet included, and remove the password compliant reliance on SSH, but that doesn't work on the web interface. So those credentials, are going to be for the web interface, not benefiting from the key-based SSH authentication.
Yes. Like your like, unless they do certificate-based authentication, and even then, it will not save them from credential harvesting.
Right.
Like, if you steal the certificate from admin's browser along with the password for the said certificate, well, you just got the credential for yourself.
Yep.
Though it will make breaking into a device much harder. Like, you break into a device and what you have is a lot of public keys. Congrats, brute force them. So this would make for a very strong authentication system. But on the other side of the spectrum, we have complexity with management of that certificate. Like,
Yes.
you have to rotate them, you have to have a PKI, and this might be doable in the scope of large company, but I can guarantee you that medium and smaller companies are not gonna be doing that.
Yep.
It's just too much complexity for not a lot of security gain. So the real answer is like fixing the mess with hash management. Like, let's imagine perfect world. Like, FortiOS did everything right. And in this case, what would happen is that old password would be visible, so administrators would know exactly the risk. They will see that their old password is still stored there. Just config, look at config, see but hash, change password, see but hash still, remove it, right? And Google documentation. And lock out the accounts that use the old hash, so that like until somebody changes their password, you cannot log in, right? So imagine that FortiOS did it like this. It would still be possible to brute force the passwords, but brute forcing PBKDF2 is exponentially slower than SHA-256.
Right.
And like, it would require a lot more hardware, a lot more effort from the attacker's side. And also, attackers would not have an easy time recovering all their credentials. Like, even if they could replicate SHA-256 hashes and they had the leak, they would still have to somehow crack PBKDF2.
Yeah.
Like, so
Yeah, that's what it made this attack sort like the scope of this attack exponentially larger because of the weak password hashing issue in previous leaks and info stealers.
It's not even like just problems with previous hashing, it's also like mismanagement of how you store the old hash and how it's used.
Yep. And I mean, this culminated in FortiGate Sniffer, which is interesting because it's not malware that goes on a FortiOS device. It's FortiGate Sniffer is almost like an orchestrator that you run on your workstation, and you give it access to a bunch of Fortinet devices, and it deploys a sniffer to it, and then collects the credentials back that the sniffers are catching. And so they basically ran a FortiOS command, I forget the exact command, to sniff credentials over 24 different protocols. So it wasn't just limited in scope to a few protocols. It was like whatever traffic is passing through it, it matched those 24 protocols. They had intelligence that when they pulled back the traffic, the FortiGate sniffer on your workstation extracted those passwords, and then they saw screenshots of like a dashboard where they were using this utility that they created to collect and sort through and manage those credentials, which is pretty advanced.
We have some live listeners, you guys, so we're getting some comments on the link stream. And one person asked a question that I've been kind of chewing on, which is, has anybody claimed responsibility for this attack yet? And this, I mean, I know it's being attributed to Santa Ad, which is an initial access broker group or whatever. To me, this doesn't seem like the kind of an attack that someone claims responsibility for, quote unquote. It's like, seems very financially motivated, and it's not really even one individual attack. It's like someone was sniffing and harvesting all these
Yeah,
credentials
the
for
whole
the purpose of selling them for the purpose of other attacks. But I feel like when uh, someone claims responsibility for an attack, it's either sort of politically or just ego motivated, which I've never heard of this group before. I don't know. Has anyone claimed responsibility, or is there just
no.
speculative attribution from
Yeah,
the discovery?
there's just indicators. Russian speaking multi-operator threat group Unit 42
Mm.
uh dubbed it Santa ad or Santa AD. This is definitely, I agree with the classification. This is more than likely an initial access broker, just based on the indicators that we have. These are
Mhm.
folks collecting initial access credentials for the purpose of selling them, not using the credentials to then monetize. So this is the kind of subgroups that we have within threat actors that specialize. This group was just initial access, and then so I've got a bunch of credentials, and I'm going to sell it to ransomware operators. I'm going to sell it to other groups that want to conduct espionage or whomever.
Yeah, it's sort of a middleware-ish type of role to play in the overall ecosystem.
Yep. And I mean, this campaign is very similar to other campaigns that identify. So they're scanning the internet. They're identifying. They had actually really good. Actually, Vlad, it's kind of funny. It's similar to how we design systems for defenders to identify devices, identify which device type it is, and then take specific actions based on that device type. The threat actors created just that. If you read through some of the in-depth, detailed documents that analyze the tradecraft, uh, it once they scan the internet and Shodan, they further refined that to specifically filter out anything that wasn't a FortiGate firewall. They also had indicators in there to detect a honeypot, and one of their indicators was if we attempt to brute password guess 3 credentials in a row and those 3 are successful, that's likely a honeypot that accepts those first 3 credentials. So they had honeypot detection in there, and again, a lot of refinement to weed out things that were not Fortinet, FortiGate firewalls, which I thought was pretty good. I mean, hat tip to them. But
Yeah,
also,
that's
like,
a tidbit that if you you get it within 3, it's probably a honeypot.
yeah, it's
Really
basic
interesting
detection.
little, yeah.
They also used the certificate. I'm assuming they could likely also weed out honeypots with this technique as well, not to give the attackers any idea. But they retrieved the SSL certificate that was associated with the device, and they looked at the metadata fields inside the certificate, and they're like, what organization does this belong to? And that's one way they were able to fill out the company, the industry, the revenue, and the head count. Because I looked at your Fortinet device, the certificate was XYZ large publicly traded company, and now I know who that firewall belongs to. Then I can take that data and enrich it with your industry revenue and headcount. So when I go sell the data, I can put more or less of a price tag on it based on who I've compromised.
Mm-hmm. So like in this case, it's like imagine like insane harvesting and like considering how users manage their passwords, it's probably credentials are probably useful for the user, say, compromised as well. And depending on who the
Yep.
hell the user is, the credentials might be quite a bit more valuable than just FortiOS creds for their company. Like, imagine also getting into company Salesforce as a high-level CEO or like some high-level
Yeah.
admin, and suddenly you have a ton of intelligence
Yeah, and
out
that's
of
what they
nowhere.
do. Once they get access to a platform like that based on these credentials, I'm not sure that this group did that, but other groups, I've been told by people who are doing threat intelligence, is that these groups, based on credential abuse, will go, like you said, Vlad, oh, look, I can log into your Salesforce. So you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to dump all the data from your Salesforce. I'm going to export whatever I can based on my user permissions. And then I'm going to take that to another system or perhaps another group. I forget the name of the group. Leak Bazaar? I think it's Leak Bazaar. I'm going to take that to Leak Bazaar and I'm going to give them the, hundreds of gigabytes or terabyte of data. And they're going to sift through it and tell me what place a value on that information. Because I've gathered so much, I need help figuring out what I've stolen. And that's how they're operating today, which is interesting.
Yep.
Yeah. What else, Chase, do we want to talk about with?
Yeah. One other, I mean, as I'm thinking about sort of just how we categorize and report on this kind of incident, the fact that some older vulnerabilities were a part of the mix here. And so, I mean, returning to the Verizon data breach investigation report, as I often do, they talk about the number of vulnerabilities that get exploited, and they talk about the number of devices, network devices or edge devices that participate in breaches. And it's like, this is sort of a middle ground where there was a vulnerability that was a part of a prior breach that led to the leak of a bunch of these credentials or hashes or such. So it's like, how do you count that? And it just, I really feel for the defenders, whether it's the security team or the ops team or the infrastructure team who is responsible for trying to protect these network edge devices in the first place, or do incident response after this, because it's like, who is responsible for this probably does not have all the accesses and tools and stuff that they need to actually be able to effectively discover and scope this kind of activity in their environment and fix it very quickly. And so they're probably in an ongoing world of pain for a while, because I'm guessing that the machinery is not super well oiled to respond to an incident like this inside of an organization that has a lot of FortiGates or whatever.
Yep, doing something like this, like even detecting, like if you have old hash, needs you to have a very high level credential account, so that you can actually dump the config.
Yeah, it needs super admin.
I don't know if it needs super admin specifically or not, but it is definitely a high level account. And then to fix it, you for sure need a super admin. So like there is a reason like for our network devices sensor actually require high privilege account, even though we understand that it's actually dangerous, and we have a lot of tools in place to prevent us becoming like the next SolarWinds incident. Like again, I don't want to keep singling out the companies, just incidents that pretty much started the modern storm with like attacks against network devices and whatnot. So it's not about the company anymore. Maybe they fixed their race by now. I didn't check. Long enough time passed where it is possible. But in this case, like the interesting part is that if we have to go back and recommend yet again on yet another BTS episode, don't expose your management interfaces to public. Public should only ever see your VPN interface, specifically OpenVPN or WireGuard or whatever have you. Nothing else should be sticking
even
out.
in this case, I'm concerned the scope and breadth of this attack. That sometimes it wouldn't matter, even if you don't expose it to the internet. Attackers could still, if they have a foothold in your network through some other mechanism, they're going to find these devices and turn them into passive sniffers, and that's bad. And sometimes my brain goes to, well, can't we just disable or remove the passive sniffing capability on the Fortinet devices? But then I can just see attackers putting it back. I don't think that really helps you, right? It's not a great countermeasure to that.
It's not at all like it's not like it's a countermeasure, one of countermeasures. And removing sniffing capability is not gonna help, because like eventually some attacker will come up with an RCE and bring their own sniffing capability. Like this device is de facto sitting on top of your network traffic, so whether you like it or not, it can sniff the said traffic. The only thing you can do is also go zero trust and implement some kind of TLS for your web services internally. Like, don't just rely on FortiOS to protect you. Have encryption internally. Like, this is something that you should be doing. Like, get certificates, get your own PKI, get something, it's not that complicated to get a certificate for a web server. Like, it's really complicated to manage certificates for people, but giving your web server a certificate is not that hard, right? And in this case, like, even if attacker would get on top of FortiOS, the problem would be, because your traffic is encrypted with HTTPS anyways, and if it is well configured, he can get only encrypted traffic. So yeah, right, they can sniff it all they like, they're not getting any extra credentials. So this is more like the network level defenses at this point.
Yeah, I agree. It's an encompassing thing that you need to think about. You need to model, what if an attacker gains control of my firewall, then what are our defenses? And one of those defenses is making sure I'm using secure protocols and secure password hashing or password algorithms like Active Directory. Have I done all the things to configure my Active Directory such that it's really hard for someone, even if they were to sniff the traffic, to crack these, to get those hashes, right? And there's multiple levels, even just an Active Directory, but every protocol, every system has its own way of both protecting the traffic and protecting those credentials. And oftentimes we're like, oh, like it's internal or it's not the highest priority, but attacker gets on your firewall or your router and it's game over.
Yeah, like, get your systems authenticated, give them certificates, establish trust in those certificates. Like, again, it might be complicated for a home network user, but for like a company with a dedicated administrator, even if you don't have a dedicated security department, you can task your administrator to set up certificates and like credentials and stuff. Give your admin a breathing room to do this. Give him access. Give him, like, allow him to disrupt the process a little bit to make it secure. Like, it's gonna pay off in the long term. Like, the only security that works is layered security. You don't get like a magic appliance box which will just fix all of your problems. Because, like, even if, like, let's imagine FortiOS does everything perfectly right, it's impossible to harvest credentials, it's impossible to do anything. It's impossible to write perfectly secure software. It's just not a thing. Eventually, somebody is going to find a hole, code execute on that device. Now what? And if your system, like your entire company, is not prepared for this, I have bad news for you. Like, it's not just FortiOS who is like in pain here. It's the whole industry.
Yeah. There are ways if you enable auditing and logging on your FortiOS devices, you can, I believe, I haven't tested it, but I believe you can determine if someone's running some of these commands to sniff packets. Now, while some say that might be too late, if it's an earlier indicator and you're like, oh no, the firewall's compromised, you can at least shut it down early, minimize the damage, change all your passwords, and kind of limit your exposure. If you can detect, like, wait, none of the administrators have run this sniffer command, someone else did, that's bad. So there is a logging aspect to this as well.
Yep. Store your logs outside of the device. Again, obvious advice. Not doable for home user, definitely doable for a small to medium sized company, let alone big sized. So, and it's gonna save you a lot of pain. And again, inventory your at least firewalls. Like, if you know about your 20 FortiOS devices located in different places and monitor their version and update them regularly, that's gonna save you from a lot of pain yet again. Like, if you must, maybe rotate admin credentials from time to time. Like, let's imagine, like, you are afraid of, like, oh hey, somebody harvested my admin's credential, and like, sure, make sure to just rotate it every few months. For admin accounts, that's not too hard and ask. Like,
yeah, and I'd never tell people not to update the operating system or firmware on these devices. That certainly helps, but as we've described, you can still be vulnerable. You could still be compromised.
Yeah.
The symlink persistence is what allows attackers to persist once you've done a firmware update. So there's that. There's backdoor accounts that we talked about. There's malware implants on Fortinet and other devices that persist firmware updates. Still, you should upgrade to the latest version, which is good, but there's a lot of other things you need to do to monitor these devices.
It's not it's not the only thing to do, of course. Like the mindset should be also, okay, like this is what we do in Eclipse, by the way. Like, what if somebody broke into our platform? Let's imagine that a really bad day comes for Eclipsium and somebody breaks into our platform. So we plan for it. We don't just, we have very secure processes which will protect us, so this is not going to happen. Yeah, that's not how it works in this industry.
Not how it works.
Okay, it happened. What do you have to mitigate, at least somewhat, the impact, right? So we have mitigation mechanisms for different scenarios. Like, for example, we try to add extra protection from jumping from our platform to our customers. Like, for example, because if we have a bad day, we don't want our customers to also have a bad day. So there is a whole lot of stuff you can actually do if you start to think about the problem. And not all of the stuff is really complicated. Like some of it is like, okay, just properly set up your certificates for web servers. Yeah, it's gonna take you a couple of weeks, but if you have an administrator, you can do this. It's not that bad or that time consuming.
Yep. That was a lot to this attack.
Again,
Big one.
Yeah. It's just so encompassing that it's like while we are bashing on FortiOS at this point, it's like it's not FortiOS specific. Replaces FortiOS with another vendor name for a security appliance like PanOS, JuneOS, Mikrotik, like Ubiquiti, Cisco. Add any vendor which makes a firewall/router, and you get the exact same reason we just did.
Yeah,
It's not specific to one vendor.
No, I agree. The campaigns similar to this have targeted Cisco ASA and FTD devices, as well as Avanti devices, and the TTPs are very similar. Compromise the device, implant the device in some way, maybe hook the login function. Like it takes different forms, but attackers are targeting these devices again from multiple vendors, using that to collect credentials and then using that to pivot, or just collecting credentials and selling them, and someone else is going to use those to pivot into your environment. So this is very much what's happening today, and we kind of just got lucky that this tradecraft leaked and got deep intelligence as to what happened.
Yeah, in many cases you don't get any information about this. Like you might get some surface level, yes, this happened. We don't always get like a full log of how many credentials got stolen or how attacker operate. In this case, we know exactly that they did hash cracking and whatnot. And by the way, they're not the first attacker to do this exact thing. Like the industry can keep insisting that yeah, we can make it better without any change, but no. Like the actual change to happen, like is like for administrators who start thinking about the system, they're like, okay, it got broken. Now what? I need to have something on top of just relying on it.
Yeah.
And like when you have 4, 5, 6 mitigating controls, suddenly if attackers break in, sure they broke into your firewall, but now they have to face like trying to like break through HTTPS encryption, and like they have still a lot of other authentication to go through.
Well, it's a great point too, Vlad, in the context of Chase. You wanted to, I think, talk about this in the context of Mythos. And so let's say we have, and we have great AI technology to identify vulnerabilities. Hopefully we can use that same technology, and it's evolving to create patches and fixes for those vulnerabilities. They still have to get rolled out to customers, and customers have to apply them. But what we're talking about here in this case is like, even if you've done that, we talked about a lot of other things that you must do in order to be more resilient, that go above and beyond the relying on the vendor to find and fix vulnerabilities, and even you applying those patches. You could still be in a vulnerable state, as is the case we described here with the storing of the old password hashes. You could have malware that persists through firmware updates. And there's all of the other insights and intelligence that you have to gather and take action on, even if you're running fully patched versions of something. I mean, there's always the possibility of a 0 day. There's always the possibility a credential leaked, even if you've hardened and upgraded your network edge devices even to the latest versions and done some hardening. You're not done. It's a constant process.
Yeah. This is a great sort of example of, I mean, there are companies that got access to Mythos as part of the Project Glasswing immediately started talking about how they had found and patched all these many vulnerabilities. So many of those have not hit, maybe any of them haven't hit the 90-day disclosure window yet. So we don't even know what they were, but all these companies, Mozilla saying, oh, we found and fixed 271 vulnerabilities thanks to Mythos. But if you dig a little bit deeper, they found the vulnerabilities, but Mythos couldn't actually write the patches. They had to go patch it. And then a further layer, when you look at things like Fortinet or Palo Alto, which was in the Project Glasswing, I believe, Cisco, these other big vendors, they can find the vulnerabilities, they can build the patch, and it's still going to take so long for that patch to make its way out into the world and get rolled out to the actual end user. And highly possible that by the time the patch or the vulnerability is disclosed, even if there's a patch available, there's still a significant window of time where the patch is out there. The adversary knows just as well as the defender does, but it hasn't been patched yet because it has to go through this really slow machinery. Patching has operational risk associated with it that, patching fast creates a risk of having downtime and other second order effects that security teams and operations teams are rightly wary of. And so they don't want to roll out the patches too fast. And so the more we have tons of vulnerabilities, tons of patches, the patch release cycle for these big companies escalates both in volume and probably in speed. And that companies, the defenders inside these companies that use the products, their capacity to patch or their speed is not actually going up. It's going down. It's getting slower. The number of patches they can successfully roll out and the speed they can roll them out at are getting worse, according to that same Verizon report. So I think, Mythos, there's a lot of sort of messaging happening about how it's affecting cybersecurity. And
there's not only
going to create a hard time for a lot of teams for a while that are kind
of point out too, Chase, that there's not always a patch. Sometimes a vulnerability or misconfiguration or something is identified, and they're like Apple just had one that they couldn't patch, right?
Yeah.
And we've seen that in a lot of firmware based systems where there's a specific vulnerability that's tied to the hardware, they can't fix it. But there's also like the Arista case where they had a vulnerability and they're like, we're not gonna, and Microsoft does this too, like we're not gonna patch this because it could have too many negative effects. So the answer is you need to configure your systems in this way in order to be resilient from that. So the answer isn't even always, we'll just go apply a patch. The answer may be, you need to reconfigure your systems to not be vulnerable to this, which can almost be the same or worse than applying a patch.
Yeah, way less clear cut as to what to do and how to do it. Yeah, the impact of AI on vulnerability management, on vulnerability disclosure programs is still shaking out and going to shake out for a long time, but I don't think it's going to be a unalloyed good.
No, because like in this case, yes, you should have applied a firmware update. Also, you need to do other work to make sure your system is configured to be more resilient. So sometimes the answer is both a patch and configuration.
Mm-hmm.
What will happen is that AI will start forcing a lot of the companies who are right now trying to stay obscure into the open, because it will make no more sense to actually stay obscure. Like, if attacker can pretty much just dump firmware and reverse engineer it with AI within a day and get all of the dirty nitty-gritty details, and they will start doing this even more regularly than they do now, then any kind of obscurity is just gone. At that point, it is much better to come out and fully in the open and operate in the friggin' open, because now you get feedback from security researchers as well, instead of just getting messed with by attackers, right? And like, this is the only way forward. Like, there is just like, it's not magical models that leads to vulnerability discoveries, it's magical engineering effort as well as a lot of knowledge behind how to set this up. Like, raw model will not reverse engineer your binary, it needs tools. And like, if you don't set up the tools properly, you're not getting anything out of the model, even if it can. So
cool. I think it's a good place to wrap up. I want to thank Chase and Vlad for appearing on the show today. Thank everyone for listening and watching this edition of Below the Surface. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time.
Thanks, Paul. Thanks, Vlad.